Personal finance presentation. Checking account selection factors. Prepare to get financially fit by practicing personal finance. We're thinking about different factors we can compare and contrast for different institutions if we're comparing the checking account specifically. These are also just factors that we want to be aware of with regards to the checking account. First, we have restrictions like minimum balances. So oftentimes, remember how the bank in essence is going to be making money for something like a checking account, which if you think about it, they're giving us a lot of services in order to manage our money within the checking account for fairly low costs. How can they do that? Well, they're going to take some of the money that we have in the bank, keep a reserve of it, they're loaning the rest of it out, typically trying to get a return on it, typically for things like small business loans and mortgages, earning interest on that. So therefore, they want to have some balance in the account and at least know that it's not going to be going over balance and have a negative balance because there's no benefit in essence to the bank for that. So they might then require some type of minimum balances. Those minimum balances may change from institution to institution. You want to think if you're comfortable with that minimum balance because you would like to be operating with your cash level above that minimum balance so that you're not paying the fees if it goes below that. So if that is a concern for you, then you want to be looking at the institutions and what the different minimum balances would be for them. Fees, do they increase over time? We'll talk a little bit more about different types of fees at a future slide. But in general, we want to know what are the fees? What are the listings of the fees that are there? Are they scheduled to be increasing over time? Meaning, do they increase after 60 days of having the account or something like that? And also, they may just change with regards to the policy of the bank over time, meaning we might have to reevaluate from time to time and see if this is still the best option for us. Interest rate and computation. So if we have interest that is going to be earned in the checking account, then and we may have very little to no interest in the checking account as opposed to possibly savings accounts. Note that if you're in a time of low interest rates, then you might say, well, that's almost insignificant at this point. But that could change. We could end up in a time with higher interest rates where they could be quite important to know what the interest rate options are at that point. And if that happens, then you basically want to make a reevaluation and see if that's a changing factor, a game changer with regards to your decision-making process. We might talk about that a little bit more in a future slide. Special services like overdraft protection. We'll take a little bit more look at special services in a future slide, but overdraft protection would be something to me I would want to have a must-have with regards to the checking account so that if there was a problem, I went into the negative, I'd have some protection to make sure that the payments that I make beyond that point are still honored, hopefully, and possibly lower the costs of that. And note that you could have something happen like someone steals access to your account or something like that too, even if you're managing your account well, which could result in this overdraft happening. And you'd like to have the protection, I would think, in that event. Be careful of bundle deal that may include services you do not need. So this is a typical type of sales strategy where they'll put all these neat things together into a bundle, but you really don't need everything in that bundle. You might be familiar with this with things like buying cable or something like that, or the cable and the phone and so on. It might be a good thing if you're using everything in the bundle, but if you're paying things over on the bundle that you would if you just bought them individually, just buying the things that you need, then it could be a bad thing. So it's kind of you got to weigh those two options out. Hours and locations. So you also want to see if it's FDIC insured. So this is kind of a must-have, I would think, for your main checking account to make sure that you have the safeguard of FDIC insurance for it. In hours and location of branch locations, this may or may not be an important factor for you, but you want to know, do you have, what other locations there and what are the options for me to get service at a location if that's an important point for me. Now let's go into the fees a little bit more closely. So we could have monthly fees. You may or may not in the checking account have the monthly fees. They might be lower if you have basically the minimum balance, you'll recall, but these are the types of fees that you might see. Fees for each check or deposit. So are they charging you for basically checks and deposits and print? So these are the types of fees that could apply. You may not have these fees there if your bank account is over the minimum balance. For example, printing of checks. So is there a fee for the printing of checks? Note that these days you can access possibly canceled checks and so on using your online services. So you want to see how good is the access for you to be able to look at that more detail. Fee to obtain canceled checks. So it used to be that you would write more checks, right? You'd be writing the check and then you'd see the amount that's going to decrease from your checking account into the bank statement. But all you really have on the bank statement is the check number and the amount that decreased. You don't know who you paid to it because you don't have the check where you actually wrote the vendor. It wasn't in the detail on the bank statement. So nowadays, oftentimes you can get access to those canceled checks if you have online checking, and they'll give you a nice little link to the check. It used to be that you had to actually get the canceled check then, and so that you can verify it, which was an added process. You can see why that would be an added pain to do. But now, oftentimes, you can get access to that possibly digitally, and so you want to see if you have the sophisticated enough online banking, especially if you're using checks, to double check and see the canceled check so you can see who you paid for that check if you have a question about it or if you want to see if something has cleared. Also note that a lot of times you have the online payments now, which of course means you're writing less checks, which of course means the canceled checks and acquiring them becomes less important. And when you pay for something with an online transfer, you will whether it comes out of your checking account or whether you do it through a credit card, you will typically have more information, like the vendor information, at least in part, will typically be in some way there in the description or memo line of the check. So keep those two things in mind. Overdraft, once again, do you pay for the overdraft? Note that the overdraft is kind of like an insurance. You do not want your checking account to go below zero, but if it does so, either by an error on your side or if someone steals, access to your account and it goes below zero, then it would be nice to have the protection there. What are the costs with relation to it? Stop payment orders. So if you have to put on a stop payment order, what's going to be the cost of that? Hopefully this isn't something that you need to do often, but if you do need to do it, you might want to see what that cost is. And certified check fee. So is there a cost for a certified check? Note that you might need the certified check for certain types of payments when you're dealing with people that want that double verification that your check is valid. So if you rent somewhere or something like that, the first check they want might be a certified check, or if for whatever reason a larger dollar amount, they might want it certified, meaning they have more verification that your check is good, that it won't bounce, so that you have sufficient funds. Fees for online banking. So clearly these days online banking is becoming more and more important for many people. And so are there any fees with regards to the online banking? Then we have special services like the direct deposit. So clearly, if you're working somewhere as a W-2 employee or something like that, or these days even from the IRS or in other places that you're working with, you might want a direct deposit going directly, of course, into your checking account. So do they have the availability of that? Availability of ATMs. So if you need to go basically get cash at a regular basis, then they might charge you if the ATM is not their ATM, of course, and so you want to make sure that you have a local ATM if you want the relevant cash on hand. That may or may not become more and more or less important as things become more digital in the future, but I think it's still an important factor for many people. It's nice to be able to pay some things in cash, nice to be able to tip people in cash and whatnot. So it's good to have some cash there for you and not have to pay for it getting it. So overdraft protection. So what's going to be the cost for overdraft protection? Once again, I think that would be a must-have type of thing, giving you some safeguards, in my opinion, giving you some safeguards as to whether your account goes below zero, and so that your payments are still honored in that case, hopefully up to a certain point, so that you don't get in a credit problem, especially in the event that someone steals access to your account or something like that, and not only steals your money, but then draws you into an overdraft and then ruins your credit score, right? But at least you can stop part of that, hopefully. Discounts or free checking for some groups. So they might have free checking or discounts for like students and senior citizens. So if you fall into some of those groups that might have special services, then take a look at those and see if you can get access to them. Interest rates, minimum. So if you get interest rates on the checking account, right now they're pretty minimal if they're at all. But note that these things could change. So if interest rates become important at this point in time, they're thinking inflation is one of those things that's continually debated at this point. If inflation goes up, interest rates will typically go up, and then if there's a period of inflation, interest becomes more and more important. And like I said, we've been on a long period of low rates, low inflation, or so what and so forth. But there's been times where there's been a long period of high inflation, and I'm in the U.S., so it could, obviously, you want to keep an eye on that. It could be important. So anyway, the minimum deposit to earn the interest. So you might need, like, if you have an interest in a checking account, if they were to pay you, they might say, hey, you need a minimum deposit in order to get the interest. So what is that? What's their method of compounding? Do they compound monthly, annually, perpetually? Portion of balance for compounding interest. So meaning, are you compounding the interest on the full balance of the account? Or are you saying, I'm adding interest on an amount over and above this minimum balance amount? Other payment methods. So you might have other methods of payment that you would like to possibly have available to you at the institution you're doing your checking account with, like certified checks, cashier's checks, money orders, and traveler's checks. So these are just some other kind of forms of payments that are going to be common. Some of them more likely, than others these days. Notice that with electronic transfers, some of these may or may not be as, they might be supplemented more and more with electronic kind of options. But a certified check, a check where the issuing bank guarantees the availability of cash in a holder's account. So if you're dealing with someone that they're saying, hey, I want more verification than just simply your check, than just simply your word. I want to have a verification, in essence, verified by the bank too, or a higher level, such as when your first month of rent or something like that, often will be an instance where you might need this information. So you might go a long time without needing a certified check, and then when you make some purchase, like a car or something like that, then all of a sudden they want a certified check. So banks usually set aside the amount of the money listed on the certified check in the holder's account. Certified checks are used to reduce the risk of non-payment in the event that the writer of the check does not have sufficient funds. So you can imagine that if you're, renting to someone or something like that, they write you a check and then it bounces, meaning they don't have sufficient funds. That's frustrating for a large transaction, and they want to, verify that you have the funds and have that double verification. Downside to using certified checks include depositors not being able to place a stop payment order on a certified check, as well as fees charged for issuing the certified check. So there could be fees when you do the certified check. So it's kind of annoying when someone asks you for a certified check in an event where they don't really need to, because then you got to go to the bank, you got to get the certified check, and you got to basically pay for part of it. And you're dealing with someone who's basically saying, I don't trust your normal check, but a lot of time it's just a bureaucratic thing. It's not, so you got to do what you got to do. So they are most often used for payment involving large sums of money. And then we have the cashier's check. They cannot bounce generally, a cashier's check, using watermark and required bank signatures. A cashier's check is hard to counterfeit. However, there are still some cashier's check scams out there. So the funds are usually available to the payee by the next business day. Then we have the money orders. You may have to pay a small fee for the money orders. You can purchase money orders at banks, and credit unions may also purchase at a variety of locations like big box stores, post office, and even some gas stations. They are a safe alternative to using cash or checks. International money orders can be an inexpensive way to send across border and overseas quickly. So what's the difference between a cashier's check versus a money's order? So we can kind of compare and contrast these two things. The cashier's check are a type of official check that banks issue and sign. So they're issued and signed by the institution, the bank, whereas a money order is available in several places, including the U.S. Postal Service, convenience stores, drugstores, grocery stores, and check cashing companies. So in other words, not simply by the institution, the bank, the bank, the financial institution. It is usually easier to buy money orders, but cashier's checks are more secure. So cashier's checks are not entirely foolproof because scammers can create counterfeits sometimes. And then we have the traveler's checks, which are becoming more and more obsolete these days, given the fact that we have these other options like the credit cards and the electronic transfers, debit cards, and so on. But the traveler's checks are a form of payment issued by financial institutions. They are paper notes usually used by people when traveling to foreign countries. Traveler's checks are purchased for set amounts and can be used to buy goods or services or be exchanged for cash. If your traveler's checks is lost or stolen, it can readily be replaced. Once widely used, traveler's checks have largely been replaced today by prepaid debit cards and credit cards.